Hey, it's Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. We picked up a little bit looking at industrialization and trying to give you some insights in terms of why the important parts of industrialization. So when it comes to the map assessment, you can do your absolute very best. What we're also including in our discussion of industrialization are some test items that have been pulled from maps to give you some familiarity with the types of questions, of course, that will be asked. And there may be some questions, of course, that can give you some insight in terms of what some correct answers would be, of course, when this test rolls around. What we're going to do is look at industrialization, the assessment, and it's going to cover the standard U.S. History 3, progressive movement, evaluate causes, goals, and outcomes of the progressive movement. And with that, what we'll do, of course, is we'll go ahead and jump in and see if we can look at some of those questions and maybe go through them and decide what some of the correct answers could be and give you some insights about what you can do, of course, to come up with those correct answers. All right, the first question that we have here comes from one of the map assessments. It says Industrialization Assessment Standard 3. What was the main purpose of the Sherman Antitrust Act, Standard 3.4, to allow government to use labor unions to weaken powerful corporations, to authorize the government to gain control ownership in large companies, authorize the government to pursue legal proceedings to dissolve monopolies, to allow the government to pursue legal action against workers with monopolies. Well, the Sherman Antitrust Act, its purpose was to outlaw monopolies. It didn't have a whole lot of power to do anything, of course, initially, but it was going to become bolstered by the Clayton Antitrust Act. So we said it was to eliminate monopolies. So to allow governments to use labor unions to weaken powerful corporations? No. To authorize the government to gain controlling ownership in large companies? Didn't say anything about them taking over the companies. To authorize the government to pursue legal proceedings to dissolve monopolies? Possibly. To allow the government to pursue legal action against workers within monopolies? No. What it was about was C, to authorize the government to pursue legal proceedings to dissolve monopolies. All right, look at the next question. The Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914 was enacted to address certain practices that earlier antitrust legislation did not clearly prohibit. This excerpt comes from the Federal Trade Commission's website. Section 7 of the Clayton Act prohibits mergers and acquisitions where the effect may substantially to lessen competition or tend to create a monopoly. As we said a few moments ago, the Clayton Antitrust Act was used to bolster the Sherman Antitrust Act. Based on the excerpt and your knowledge, the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914 differs from previous antitrust legislation in that its intent was to, and this is from Standard 3.4, Standard 3, Objective 4, limit the rights of corporations to diversify their stock? Nope. Protect the consumer from fraudulent claims in advertising? Nope. To prevent the development of combinations that might restrain trade? Possibly. Determine which businesses operate as illegal one-seller marketplaces. Well, the idea of the Clayton Act and the Sherman Antitrust Act was to prevent business combinations that would limit competition. So the best answer is C once again. All right, how did the direct primary, which was supported by President Theodore Roosevelt, result in domestic reform? Standard 3, Objective 3, it reduced the number of district courts, it lessened the power of political bosses, it increased the number of registered voters, it strengthened the authority of state senators. So how did direct primary, which was supported by President Roosevelt, direct primary, what it basically does, and this is just, once again, this is just something that comes from the fact list that we provided for you. But the idea of the direct primary was to give people more of a say in terms of who their representatives would be. So it reduced the number of districts in court? Nope. It lessened the power of political bosses? Possibly. It increased the number of registered voters? Strengthened the authority of state senators? The best answer, it lessened the power of political bosses. Well, you say, well, how did it lessen the power of political bosses? What it basically did is it gave them, the access to choosing who their candidate would be themselves, not somebody make it for them. This excerpt comes from the History of Standard Oil Company, written by Ida M. Tarbell in 1904. Almost constantly since its organization in 1870, the Standard Oil Company has been under investigation by the Congress of the United States and by legislatures of various states in which it is operated on the suspicion that it was receiving rebates from railroads and was practicing methods in restraint of free trade. Based on the excerpt and your knowledge which statement describes the effect publications such as this one had on public opinion during the progressive movement. Ida Tarbell was a muckraker. Muckrakers, their job, of course, was to put pressure on the government, of course, for a change so that it could benefit, of course, consumers. Based on the excerpt of your own knowledge, which statement describes the effect publications such as this had on the public opinion during the progressive movement? Standard 3. Objective 1. Investigative reports expose corruption, swaying public opinion to support social and political reform. Publications exposing corporate corruption sway public opinion in favor of suppression of free speech. Corporations investigative reports to increase their political power by swaying public opinion in their favor. Reporters use weekly and monthly publications to sway public opinion toward the support of corporate trust. The answer, once again, think about what muckrakers did. Once again, go to your fact list. All right, in 1896, the Supreme Court upheld this Louisiana law. All railway companies carrying passengers in their coaches in this state shall provide equal but separate accommodations. No persons or persons shall be admitted to occupy seats in coaches other than the ones assigned to them on account of the race they belong to. What was the consequence of this ruling? Exceptions were made based on the economic status. Facilities provided for African Americans were inferior. Public funds were withheld from companies for refusing to comply. Local governments passed laws protecting the African American equality. Well, 1896, once again from the fact this was Plessy v. Ferguson, what it is, it upheld the idea of separate but equal. And in this particular case, separate but equal was anything but separate. It was separate, but it was anything but equal. And the best answer was B. All right, the following sections of the Mississippi Constitution of 1890 described election regulations. Section 241, every male inhabitant of this state who is a citizen of the United States, 21 years old and upwards, who has resided in this state 2 years and 1 year in the election district, who has paid all taxes for the 2 preceding years, is declared to be a qualified elector. A uniform poll tax of $2 is hereby imposed on every male inhabitant of this state between the ages of 21 and 60. Every elector shall be able to read any section of the Constitution of the state, or he shall be able to understand the same when read to him or give a reasonable interpretation of. What was the purpose of these constitutional regulations? Well, to limit access to voting, to end the one-party system, to ensure the orderly collection of tax revenues, to allow local governments to determine polling places. Well, all 3 of those things, once again from the fact list, all those things, of course, would limit African Americans, of course, from voting in the state of Mississippi. And the best answer was A, limit access to voting. All right. All right. What we tried to do with these assessment items is to give you some ideas about, what are the types of questions that you can see on the test. And some of them involve some reading. And they not only require that you read, but you also have to have a knowledge basis so that you can come through, of course, and answer those questions. So, but if you do what we've asked you to do, go through and master your facts, and master the facts, of course, that we put forth, and then review those things that we gave you in terms of review, you'll be fine. This is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. Do well on the MAP assessment U.S. History Code. Once again, now it's important. And the reason why it's important is it's your gateway, of course, to becoming a senior. We'll see you next time.